ready to go.
And just one more for the record. You were born in Peoria?
I was born in Morton, Illinois, actually out in the country from Morton.
Born in Morton.
Without benefit of a doctor.
Midwife?
Midwife.
And was that true for your brother, your peer, your siblings?
Well, I was the only one that was born at home.
Okay.
And the rest were all born in hospitals. But I have a sister that's 3 years younger, and she lives in Pontiac, Illinois.
And then Steve.
I had another brother, William, who died at 23 with a his arteries had not developed from birth, and he blew out one of those arteries and passed away. I have a younger brother that's 17 years younger, and that's Stephen Aupperle, and I had the pleasure of naming Stephen. At that time, it was after a comic book character, and it was it was Steve Roper, and he was.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, and so
Okay.
Steve is running the business now, and we're 113 years old.
And you have a fourth generation with Bill in the business.
Mm-hmm. His son is taking over from him.
Ah.
So.
You and I had talked once before a little bit about your family's immigration. As I recall, you told me Bavaria.
It was near Alsace-Lorraine, which
Okay.
is in the Bavarian area. And well, looking back, we had ancestors that Aupperle was spelled with a Y on the end, and if it was pronounced with that, it would be Aupperle, which sounded a little too French for my grandfather, and the Y was dropped.
Were they Swiss German by any chance originally?
Well, further back than my grandfather was either his father or his grandfather came from Switzerland, and religion was a problem in Switzerland at that time, and so that person decided to go to Germany and start a church in Germany. And he walked from his home in Switzerland all the way to Germany, and along the way, in order to survive, he learned the trade of making shoes, and he would stop at a farmhouse and make a pair of shoes for the owner, and the owner would give him a meal and let him sleep all night and off the next day. So he got his church built, and there wasn't much record of what happened to him after that. But
would he have been an Anabaptist, do you think? Is that why he left?
The religion that we ended up with was Apostolic Christian.
Okay.
And
so it was an Anabaptist.
Actually, Apostolic Christian might be a little breakaway from Catholics, I think.
Actually, they all grew out of the Anabaptist movement. Mennonite, Amish, and Apostolics. Okay, well, that all makes sense. So we talked a little bit about up to that point. Then the next, somewhere, generation down or two generations down, somebody packed up and came to the United States. How did that happen?
My grandfather's father passed away when my grandfather was 2 years old. My grandfather also had a sister that was a small child, probably less than a year old. And it was very difficult for the widow to maintain 2 children in Germany at that time. And my grandfather's mother was worried that he would be drafted into the Army. And so he was 15 years old, and she made arrangements for someone in Ohio to pay for his trip to the U.S. And for that, he had to work on this person's farm for 2 years. He turned 16 on the trip to the United States. He said he had about the equivalent of $5 in his pocket and couldn't speak a word of English. He grew up to be a successful businessman, and he never had any hint of a foreign sound to when he talked. He was young enough at 16. He learned English the way we all do. So
This was Gotland.
that was Godluck. Yeah.
Okay.
Later on, he brought his mother back here, and she was young enough. She fell in love with an individual, and they purchased ground in Mexico, and she lived her life in Mexico after her son brought her back here, and she's buried in Tampico, Mexico.
That's fascinating.